Can you give me an update on the community portal launched by the Firearms Registry in March this year, where it's up to and what's happening with it?
Thank you, Mr. Borsak. For the record, Scott Cook is my name. The Gun Safe portal, as you would be aware, was launched for the dealers in New South Wales, firearms dealers in New South Wales last October. Since that date, there's been over 42,000 transactions where those dealers have, in lifetime, transferred firearms and bought sold firearms. That process went through a reconciliation with dealers so that the registry's holdings are matched exactly with the dealers' holdings from the outset, and so that's significantly reduced different views on what dealers should or should not be holding at any point in time. So that's been operating very well. There's been fabulous feedback from the dealers. We've made some modifications to that system, and most recently we've added the amnesty aspect to the dealers portal for the National Firearms Amnesty, which commenced on the 1st of July. That addition to Gun Safe has been well received and well used and has gone off without a hitch. Additionally, as you'd be aware, in February of this year, we launched the online licences and renewals, permits to acquire, change of address, safe storage, components of the Gun Safe system. There's been some 62,000 transactions that have occurred, most of them occurring within 6 weeks, many occurring within 10 days. And that system's operating very well. There's been a couple of small hiccups where we've taken feedback from licence holders and others, and we've made minor modifications to that system. The Gun Safe system is continuing to evolve. The next phase of Gun Safe looks at accountabilities for the Firearm Registry and publication of data, etc. So those accountability modules are currently being built, which will enable us to provide the community and internally within the Firearms Registry and to the wider police force accurate lifetime data about performance. Additionally, there's a further business case currently being considered for the second phase of Gun Safe, which will flow into next year, which will focus on bringing clubs online, ranges online. It'll also focus on further work within a state activity. We're a long way progressed on that. At the moment, we have agreements with Victoria. We have data transfer with Victoria. We're close with Queensland. The ACT is on board. Border Forces engaged with us so that we will hopefully in due course be able to track firearms from the time they enter the country. And then next month I'll be engaging with South Australia as well. So Gun Safe, that new portal, is working very effectively, but as I said, it's still under development. I think it'll revolutionise how we manage the regulation of firearms in New South Wales.
Thanks, Mr. Scott. Further, how many licences and permits to acquire, etc. applications are still caught up with the ongoing backlog? When do you expect to get it cleared?
Yeah, okay. So when we went live with Gun Safe for licences in February 25th this year, there's no backlog from that point other than within that 35-day KPI, or unless we're waiting on the customer to provide further information back to us. Prior to 25th of February this year, there's a group of licence holders who were caught in an 18-month period leading up to that, which we would class as the backlog. There is about, in rough terms, 2,700 new licence applications waiting to be completed, and there is approximately 500 renewal applications waiting to be completed. I anticipate the renewal applications will be completed within the next month or so, and I anticipate that the backlog in the new applications will be completed before the end of the year. We currently have an additional 10 staff working from Sydney on that particular backlog, and that's progressing quite well. But unfortunately for those people who applied in January, for example, just before we launched Gun Safe, it's been a considerable wait, an unacceptable wait. But I think with confidence by this time, in 6 months, there will be no backlog.
Mr. Scott, I think the Firearms Registry used to publish a KPI reference chart. I'm not sure whether that was online or how it was actually accessed. I haven't seen that for a while. Is that still available?
No, it's not available. I took it down, and I did that because I didn't have enough confidence in the data that we're presenting. And so, what we're building now within GunSafe is a reliable way of gleaning lifetime data, and it's our intent to publish that data so that the public can see what's going on in real time, and so that I can present that to you and to others in the Parliament and to the community as being accurate information. And so hopefully that'll be up and running, certainly, if not by the end of the year, certainly in the early part of next year.
Okay, yeah, we'll look forward to that. Can you give us an update on the status of the firearms amnesty at the moment? Is that a question?
Yes, the amnesty is going quite well, given that we're in COVID, and I think that's perhaps impacted it a little bit. There's been a significant number of transactions with dealers in terms of surrendering of firearms in rough numbers, and I'd have to take on notice if you want particular numbers, but in rough numbers.
Could you take that on notice so I can get some actual numbers, please?
Yes, certainly, I can do that.
Oh, yeah, if you've got rough numbers, yep.
Oh, sorry.
Just for now, yep.
Yeah, just roughly about 1,700 firearms have been handed in to dealers, and at least 500 firearms have been handed into police. There is in some circumstances where the firearms are handed into dealers that may be prohibited, the police will go and collect that from dealers, so there's a duplicate count there we have to rectify, and we can do that quite easily. So I will do that prior to providing you with the actual numbers. But at this stage, given COVID, I think that's not a bad achievement. I think we're miles ahead of every other state in the country in terms of people handing firearms in.
Thanks very much. Can you give the committee an update on the firearms safe storage inspection processes? How many inspections have been conducted so far in the latest round?
So far this calendar year, we're up to about 16,000. That's 4 times the number that we did 3 years ago. In fact, I think it's almost a record in terms of recent history about our commitment to making sure that firearms are stored safely in New South Wales. Otherwise, that we've seen over the last 4 years, we've seen a halving in the number of thefts from rural and remote properties and other properties. I think our investment in safe storage and making sure that people are compliant with safe storage is paying off. I think it underpins the entire regulatory system that we're running in terms of firearms. And so I'm very glad to see that 16,000 this year has been achieved. I think we could probably do better if it wasn't for COVID. But I have to acknowledge the work being done by all the police who are being tasked to do this in addition to all their other duties that they have to do. They've really embraced this, and I think that's probably attributed to the Commissioner's focus on firearms and to the sponsorship of firearms within the organisation and the understanding across the board about how important safe storage is.
Well, yeah, I mean, 16,000 is a good number, but in the light of how many actual licences that are out there, nearly 250,000, it's really a small proportion, considering the level of safe storage that has to be provided by everybody. Are you doing that safe storage inspections on a rolling basis, or you're choosing certain groups or certain individuals, or how does that actually work?
So it's risk-based in many regards. I recently instructed all police to focus on firearms licence holders who have more than 20 firearms. We're about 2/3 the way through those particular licence holders, but quite separate to that, the region commanders operate their own regional operations, such as Operation Armour and other things that are also centred around safe storage. So look, we aim to get the premises and the locations and the quantities that indicate a higher level of risk done first. And so that's been the priority, because in our minds, if someone's got 100 firearms and they're stolen, that represents a far greater risk to the community than a single firearm that may be stolen. And so we're trying to do it completely based around risk, but we're not interfering with local operations because there may be local needs for local commanders around safe storage that they think is a priority.
Thank you. In an article in the Daily Telegraph on the 18th of August 2021, a journalist attributed to Superintendent Cameron Lindsay this statement: "The gun safe system was one of the major changes to the registry, which include formal training for the first time for staff when deciding who will get a licence." Was this an accurate report from the journalist?
Well, the registry is currently going through a business improvement process which commenced on in early April this year. That process has seen a complete overhaul of how the registry conducts all its functions. Bottom. It's highlighted a number of areas where further training is required, and all staff are being provided with additional training around decision making, around process, around their standard operating procedures. There's been extensive work done on cultural change within the registry, and I have to say that the staff at the registry have significantly embraced the change. I think they've looked forward to this sort of a change, and there's been a marked improvement, not just in performance, but in their understanding of how important what they do is and how important it is to the community of New South Wales. So yes, there's ongoing training, and there'll be further training rolled out over the next 6 to 12 months.
Do you know what the ratio of Queensland residents work in the registry as compared to New South Wales residents?
It's about 15%.
15%. Now, have those people been able to work, being locked down in Queensland?
Currently, those people are vaccinated, as I understand, and they have permits. Where we can do other workarounds with work from home, which is limited given the registry systems and processes, we've done that. But I think we're the only registry that has been functioning in a full capacity in the entire country for the last 2 years, despite interruptions to COVID. So I think that's an achievement, and I think that registry staff need to be applauded for that.
Well, you've got to the nub of the question. Okay, thank you. Paragraph 525 of the New South Wales Coroner's Report on the inquest into the deaths of Jack and Jennifer Edwards mentions that the Firearms Registry has a policy of treating apprehended violence orders that have been revoked and dismissed by the New South Wales Court as active AVOs. What is the registry's policy regarding expired AVOs?
So this is quite complex. As you'd be aware, in 2016, the domestic violence legislation changed, and when it changed the jurisdiction of the local court. So this only affects final orders that have expired, and people who have sought revocation following the expiry in the local court cannot do that. There's a jurisdictional error that's occurred there, the Crown Solicitor has advised on. In those circumstances, and only those circumstances, the revocation is not recognised by the registry. On the other hand, if they had taken that revocation application to the district court, it would be recognised because the district court has the appropriate jurisdiction. So it's quite complex, and it's quite complex legally, and it's only a small part of the business. But in general terms, revoked orders are not considered as disqualifying offences. They're considered in terms of fit and proper person. So the policy is not to simply ignore everything and do what we want. The registry is complying with the law and complying with the Crown Solicitor's advice that's been provided to them.
Mr. Hudson, the New South Wales Coroner was rightfully highly critical of the registry and individual employees for the systemic failures of the registry. Can you tell me whether the persons identified by their initials in the coroner's report still are working at the registry? And I obviously don't expect you to know this immediately. BW, LM, HT, TM, HP, AH, NW, and HD.
As I said here, Mr. Borsak, I couldn't tell you that. I know that some people that were criticised through that process did leave the registry, some remained, and some remained off sick. Last time I checked, Mr. Cook might have a better update on that, but I think there is a mixture of departures and leaves of absence amongst those people that were mentioned.
Thanks, Deputy. I don't have further update on that. I think if I could, Mr. Borsak, take that on notice, I'm happy to provide the information, but the Deputy's summary is correct. Some have left, some have been sick, and some have continued to work at the registry.
All right, well, if you could give me the detail on notice, that'd be great. What remedial training, if any, have they received? Obviously, those that remain.
They've had extensive training. As I said earlier, the business improvement team's been up there since earlier this year. All the staff there, including those people who remained from that particular point in time, have had retraining and new training. We're looking to make that a permanent and ongoing practice about continuous development. So the registry we will move to a form within the registry where there is ongoing updating of training, ongoing modification of systems and processes, so that we can't fall into a trap of the past where things are just done that way because they're done that way. So I have confidence that the business improvement team is implementing new regimes that will ensure that all the adjudicators at the registry are properly informed and properly trained at any given point in time.
Thank you. Is BW still employed as a supervisor at the registry?
Mr. Borsak, off the top of my head, I don't know who BW refers to. I'll have to take that on notice, if that's okay.
Okay, well, while you do that, could you tell me about LM and HP? Are they still there?
I'll follow that up for you.
Thank you. With the Public Service Commission's capability framework that sets out core competencies for specific roles.
I'm sorry, Mr. Borsak, I didn't quite catch the question.
Sorry, yeah, I'll say again. Are you familiar with the Public Service Commission's capability framework that sets out core competencies for specific roles?
Yes, I am.
And have employees at the registry been assessed to ensure that they have the required capabilities under that capability framework?
Yeah, that's currently underway. As I said, there's been significant business improvement there. Part of that will be a structural realignment, which the Commission has approved. As that process unfolds, that realignment, every single position will have its position overview and job description brought into line with those capabilities, and each applicant and each position holder will have to meet those capabilities relative to the position they occupy.
Thank you. How many sworn officers work at the registry now?
6.
Sorry?
6 sworn officers.
6, thank you. And what's the total headcount at the registry?
So there's 83 people at the registry, 6 sworn police, 77 civilians. There's an additional 10 civilian positions operating at Police Link, which are not attached to the registry but do a large component of the customer service work for the registry. Their focus is on servicing the registry. And there's an additional 10 police sworn positions at Homebush, or Olympic Park, I should say, who are working currently on backlogs which exist, we discussed earlier.
Oh, okay, that's good, thanks. Now, the 10 that are not attached, are they the ones that do the back office work and at Parramatta?
No, so I'll explain that again. The 10 at Police Link are customer service officers who do basic inquiries for customers before referring any material to the registry.
Okay.
The 10 that are based at Homebush are a temporary workforce of police who have been brought in to work through those backlogs we discussed earlier. That is the applications that had existed prior to the 25th of February this year.
Thanks very much. When the registry asks for a report from a psychologist or a psychiatrist asking for professional opinion on whether a licence applicant can own or use firearms safely and without risk to the public, who at the registry assesses those medical reports?
The short answer is the adjudicators, but the longer answer is we're currently very sensitive to the issues around this, and we're working with others. With the registry is working through how we can better approach this sensitive topic with people. It's incumbent on the registry to consider the mental health of applicants. It's a really crucial component of risk they need to manage, and so they need to seek professional advice from doctors, because they are not doctors, in regards to that individual's capacity to responsibly own a firearm or use a firearm. And so there's a lot of work going on within the registry at the moment to try and ensure that the communications that are undertaken with applicants is sensitive to their circumstances. It's not the last thing that people at the registry want to do is offend people, but they are obliged to inquire into this sort of area, and so they're currently working on reforms about those communications, and they're looking at perhaps even a specific checklist for medical practitioners, others to answer, that will make it far clearer for the adjudicators in terms of whether the person is appropriate or not to hold a firearm licence.
So I hear in your answer there that the registry does actually seek medical reports from medically qualified people when they're doing the assessment.
Yeah, that's correct.
So
Not in all circumstances. Sorry, Mr. Borsak, not in all circumstances, just where there's an issue or a potential issue relating to mental health.
Oh, well, yeah, that's what I'm talking about, the whole mental health area, because the feedback I'm getting in the office is that it's generally easier just for the registry to say no, go away. You've had some sort of mental health issue, or you may have a mental health issue, or someone said you've got a mental health issue. It's very hard to come back from that situation, even when you don't have a mental health any sort of mental health problem. It's not good enough for someone to simply say, "Oh, you've got a mental health issue," and then therefore their licenses and license removed, firearms confiscated. How do they come back from that? That's really the issue.
Yeah, I understand the question. In some circumstances, the registry have no prior detailed information about an individual's mental health history. But in other circumstances, for example, if there's been numerous COPS events of a person being taken to an institution or mental health episodes, it may be far easier to revoke in those or refuse in those circumstances because it's abundantly clear of the issues. But where it's not abundantly clear, that they're required to make contact with that individual and ask for medical evidence that would support their sound mind or their ability to own a firearm and use a firearm.
In relation to judging whether a firearms licence should be retained or not, do the police take into consideration breaches of the COVID orders?
I may have to take that on notice, Mr. Borsak. In general terms, if people are issued just infringement notices, they generally wouldn't be inclusive. But if they were charged with criminal offences, then they probably would be inclusive. So I don't know that we've had anyone refused on the basis of that yet. Perhaps one or two, but I would suggest that it wouldn't be for an infringement. It would be for an arrest, an assault, something else more substantial.
Is it always the case that if you are arrested, say for example on a charge of assault, but the charge doesn't go ahead, or you are found innocent, that you could never get your licence back?
No, that's not right. If the charge didn't go ahead and there was no conviction there, that aspect would only be considered as part of the fit and proper person or public interest test. It wouldn't be considered as as part of the disqualifying test.
Can you tell me how that test works?
Well, depending on the disqualifying test is stipulated in the legislation about particular offences that exclude people. So that's a cut and dry test. The fit and proper person test is more discretionary and will often rely on information that is not as concrete as a conviction would be. And then the overriding test is public interest test about whether in all of the circumstances, in terms of that person's living circumstances, their well-being, their associates, etc., whether they should or should not have a firearm. So that's a highly discretionary test, and there's guidance that we give to the adjudicators there, and we've talked about this before. We've published the guidelines that they use and the instructions they use. They're on the website, but they get also further assistance through the decision-making tool that has now been refined and enhanced to make sure that they go through those three stages appropriately.
Can you make the decision-making tool public?
At this stage, it's still being reviewed. I don't know that we've made it public because we really wouldn't want it to be manipulated in some way. We've published the guidelines on how decisions are made for the information of the public. They're publicly available now. The decision-making tool, if the intricacies of that were published, I think it could open it up to misuse or manipulation. However, I'm happy to take that on notice, get some advice and come back to you.
Well, Mr. Cook, what I'm getting at is that the fit and proper test for a firearms owner seems to be a moving feast. And it's certainly different today in a much more restricted way than it was when I first got my firearms licence 35, 40 years ago. It seems to be the tests are different, and quite often I'm having people come to my office saying, well, I don't understand why I'm not a fit and proper person, and the registry isn't telling them. what's going wrong or what has happened in their past. And it may be a perfectly reasonable and legitimate reason why it should be refused, but there's just no understanding of how this has been done. It's a black box, and it's changing as we go through time. Do you understand the frustration that's going on?
I certainly understand the frustration, but I think what influences that is decisions that we receive out of the NCAP sometimes bind us in terms of how we exercise those discretionary aspects. There's also other case law that comes out around fit and proper person in other aspects of the law. All of these sort of impact to some degree that moving feast you're talking about. But there's also an expectation from the community that people who have firearms are appropriately holding firearms, and I think there's been a greater focus on that in recent times. So it could just be that a combination of the reforms that we've made at the registry, the additional training, the legal position from the courts, and the expectations of the community have conspired in some way to make it more difficult than for when you obtained your licence. But look, I don't know that we should apologise for that. I take on board your point about transparency, and if we can be more transparent in terms of that decision making, then we're happy to look at that.
I only make that point because if the community understood what the requirements of a fit and proper person was, obviously not seeking to manipulate it, it might be easier for people then not to transgress it. That's all I'm saying.
I understand that. We may be able to modify the guidelines, I suspect, that and enhance that aspect of the guidelines that we publish that may be of assistance in that regard.